All right, I meant to say before we got to the text, I meant to say uh, good morning. Then John chapter 4. Go with me to John chapter 4. John chapter 4. You know, it's funny, when you're getting ready to preach, you have thoughts trending in your mind, what you're going to say. And I remember thinking earlier, I'm going to say good morning today, and then I forgot. So we'll be in John chapter 4 to get us going for this morning's lesson. This is our third Sunday starting in this text. And of course, many of you haven't been here for that. Some of you are visiting, and whatever the case may be. So I'll refresh some memories and get everyone caught up as to what's going on in the book of John, chapter 4. It's pretty early in the ministry of Jesus. And he is in the southern country in Judea, near Jerusalem, where there's a feast that was taking place, and then it's time to go back up north to his home area in Galilee. And on the way, he makes a stop to spend some time with a Samaritan woman and has a conversation with her. And it's a very deep, profound conversation. And in the midst of it, he speaks these words beginning in verse 21. This is actually closer to the end of the conversation. It says in John 4 and verse 21, Jesus said to her, "Woman, believe me, the hour comes when you shall neither in this mountain nor yet at Jerusalem worship the Father. You worship you know not what. We know what we worship, for salvation is of the Jews. But the hour is coming, yea, now is, when the true worshipers shall worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For the Father seeks such to worship him. God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth." Now, just through wonderful repetition, this 24th verse really is one of those verses that would be useful and appropriate to commit to memory. One of the reasons why it's important is because it should set us to think about what we're doing while we're worshiping the Father. This is not the kind of thing that we should take casually. It really isn't. I'm not talking about the way we dress now. A cultural thing has been to dress up very nicely, and that's a wonderful tradition. It's not like it's necessary. It's not in the Word. You can't point to a verse that says you got to dress nice or nothing like that. However, however, we know that in the heart and in the mind of the believer, there needs to be some consideration. And that's what Jesus points out in this text. Now, I want to give some more of the historical background, just a little bit, because he's talking to a Samaritan woman. Now, this woman points out that earlier that her fathers worshiped in this mountain in Samaria. It was a different place. And this was the kind of thing that divided people in those days. Now, the law of Moses, which is the whole mode, plan, the code that was given to the children of Israel, that was given to lay out the exact specifications of how worship was to take place. And it was to be centralized around one major symbol, and it was the temple. The temple, now before the temple was built by Solomon, it was the tabernacle. And there were even specific directions on how to build the tabernacle. So if you imagine them in the 40 years when they were wandering around, they had to roll up and unroll this tabernacle, and the priests had specific jobs and what to do and to set the whole thing up. And then, of course, the sacrificial system. And that's last week we talked about the word Corban. which was the word for offering. And the whole idea of the word korban, the whole idea of a sacrifice or an offering, was to get closer to God. We were able to establish that definition. So that's real important. I want everyone to make sure that you know and you're aware of the fact that worshiping God is synonymous with getting closer to Him. Now, I don't know if Ezekiel was just like on the same page with me. He picked a nice selection of songs this morning. Don't you think he did? There was some good songs that he picked out for us to worship our Father today. And the one song we just finished, He hideth me in the cleft of the rock. That's from the story of Moses requesting that he is able to see the face of God. That's him trying to get close to him, and God says, no, you can't just get close to me. You can't just see my face. So I'll tell you what, you go and kind of hide yourself in the cleft of a rock, and the way the poetry and the song makes it, come to life is beautiful. And he says, I'll put my hand over you and I'll pass over you. But that right there is an example of trying to get close to God, and that's right there in the history of the tabernacle and all those sacrifices and offerings that God gave. And the whole idea was blood. Blood had to be shed in order for us to get close to God. Another song that he led was about getting close to the cross. And at the cross, the burdens of my heart rolled away. That's a whole nother example. Trying to get close to God. And the symbol in that song is that the cross of Christ is really the only way to get close to the Father. As Jesus said in John 14 and verse 6, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man, or nobody, no one comes to the Father but by me. Now, this is important stuff because we want to be close to God. That's the whole point. We want to be close to Him. And Jesus kind of takes two ideas in the book of John that we just read. In John chapter 4, he's talking to a woman who was not a Jew. And he's talking to, and he makes reference to the fact that Jerusalem was the place to worship, and the temple was the center of worship in that era. And then he makes this statement: the time is coming when that's not going to be a thing anymore. It's not going to be about the temple anymore, but it's going to be about worshiping Him in spirit and in truth. So our challenge as humans now, our challenge as disciples now, is to make sure that we give heed to these kinds of statements when it comes to God's operation and words on what is appropriate worship. I'm not going to get into it because it's already been covered, but I just want to remind everybody that God does reject worship. He rejects lots of people's worship. Maybe at the end of the lesson, if I have time, I'll get into Leviticus chapter 10, which is more about the technical side of it, when Nadab and Abihu, because they approached God with a strange fire, were destroyed right then and there. But I also want to remind you that Jesus says in Matthew 15 that they draw nigh to me with the lips, but the hearts are far from me. Many will say to me in Matthew 7, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, and I will profess to them, I never knew you. We don't want that to be us. Last week I started yelling pretty loud. And I'm like, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to get too loud this time. So I just paused myself earlier. I just put on the brakes. You don't want that to be you on the judgment day. I'm telling you, you don't want that to be you. Jesus, didn't I in your name do many wonderful works? I worshiped you, didn't I? I said, Lord, Lord. And he says, you totally ignored what I said. I said in spirit and in truth. You didn't even think about it. You just walked through the doors and did whatever they did. You have to think about it. You pick up your Bible, you study it. You don't want to be that person. So, we talked about spirit, and we're going to talk more about truth now. I'm going to take you over to the text that my brother Richard read for you in Ephesians chapter 2 to make sure that you understand something here. As you're turning over there, I'm going to give you some background into it. So go to Ephesians chapter 2, and we're going to read out of that text. Now, the Ephesian epistle was written to both Jews and Gentiles, because remember that through the seed of Abraham, all nations would be blessed, not just the seed of Abraham, which was the Jewish nation, but also all nations would be blessed. But of course, the Jews thought that they were something, and they thought that they were the only ones that were ever going to receive grace and truth. But the Son of God opened the doors to Gentiles as well. Now, that is what the text is about. It's talking about Jews and Gentiles and the fact that Jesus changed things. He broke down the walls that divided, and he made it so that both Jews and Gentiles could be one. Jews and Gentiles would now be in unity. Now, we honestly, in the 21st century, don't have so much, like right now, I don't even know if there's anybody of Jewish descent in this room. Sometimes I speak in a place where there's someone of Jewish descent, and it's not really like a thing anymore. We've kind of moved past that, but the same kind of stuff still happens. There's still division. There's still people who, are kind of separated from God, and the whole goal is for everyone to be united. And there's only one way to unite. There's only one way to unite. And you know how that is? If two people both go to the Word, guess what? They're both going to be in unity. But if you got one person who is in the Word and one person who just does whatever, there's going to be division. So I want to read this text with you right now. It says, we're going to be in verse 18. Ephesians chapter 2 and verse 18, it says, for through him we both have access by one Spirit unto the Father. Now therefore you are no more strangers and foreigners, but fellow citizens with the saints and of the household of God, and are built upon the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Jesus Christ himself being the chief cornerstone, in whom, verse 21, in whom all the building fitly framed together grows into a holy temple. You guys catch that? Catch that word that I just read? The last word I just read. Holy temple in the Lord, in whom you also are built together for a habitation of God through the Spirit. So, a little bit of a mouthful, a lot of words, a lot of information packed into this little text. I want to make sure that we understand one of the major themes of this. There's basically two themes. It's who we are and how we got here. Who we are and how we got here. Now, the who we are, he uses a handful of words. He uses household. He uses building. He uses framing. That was a verb, framed, the past tense verb, framed. But however, he talks about being framed, not for murder. Anyway, I thought that was a good joke, but you guys didn't like it. We got to be framed. Temple. Now, that's, of course, I think you all are already with me. You already know what the main theme is going to be here, temple. And then habitation of God through the Spirit. We're a family. That's what we're supposed to be. We're supposed to be a family. That's what the word household means. Habitation, verse 22, the habitation. I mean, a habitation of God. This is a place where God is to dwell, a place where God is supposed to be. Now remember, it's not really about location. It's not like in this mountain or in this particular temple, but he refers to the people as a temple. So a lot of the things that happened under the old law, a lot of the rules, a lot of the regulations, a lot of the lessons that we can extract out of there, we will find that a lot of the same things apply to his church, to his people, which is a temple. The temple was a representation of God's presence. The only way to get into the temple and the only way to get past the veil and have access to the Ark of the Covenant was for the high priest to do some very specific sacrifices, and blood had to be shed in order for that to come to pass. It was all a shadow of things to come. We just read right in this text, and there's other places, but I wanted to focus right here because of the way Paul lays it out in such a nice, detailed way. That we are a building, we are a temple, and God dwells within. The only way to be that is to do things according to the way that he said to do them. Which is why Jesus would speak the words, God is spirit, and they that worship him must worship. That word must is key. You worship him, you must worship him in spirit and in truth. So here's the first thing that I want to do with you. I'm going to get into more details on this as we go, but I really want to establish the importance of this. The importance of this. I proclaim to you that this is a matter of life and death, based off of the good word. I proclaim it based off of Matthew 7, that I just quoted. Not everyone that says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom. I proclaim it based off of Matthew 15, when Jesus says, they draw nigh to me with their lips and their mouth, but the heart is far from me. I proclaim it based off of those types of verses. And in order for us to make sure that we worship him in spirit and in truth, we must recognize the importance of our worship service. So I'm going to take you to John chapter 2 now. John chapter 2. As we consider John chapter 2, I want you to notice a little bit of the panoramic view of what's happening in the book of John. We already see that Jesus is in the earlier part of his ministry. In chapter 1, he starts going around collecting apostles, collecting disciples, and he's starting to get some attention. He's preaching a whole different kind of message. Chapter 2, we have the first miracle, and right then and there, it's not the first moment that he starts getting attention, but what we do know is that word is getting out about him because of miracles and because of the spirit by which he speaks and what he teaches. And he does something. And one of the things about Jesus that is so unique is that Jesus did things in a very different way than anyone would have ever expected. And I can go into like a lot of different examples of that, such as a lot of people believe that he was going to be like a great general. A lot of people that he would believe that he would come with a lot more pomp and circumstance. No, he came into a manger. He came in a humble way. And when he walks up to the temple, he does something crazy. Most of us would consider this very, very wild, what he did. And as we read what we're about to read, I want you to consider the fact that Jesus actually did this. This is actually something that took place. And this is within the context of what we had just read in chapter 4. He's going to approach the temple during the time of one of the feasts. And as he is in the temple, he's going to do something. And the temple is a representation of something that's going to happen just a couple chapters away. And that's chapter 4, when he's talking about Jerusalem being the mountain where the Jews worship. So there's no accident that he's doing this right here, and the way John records it is in a particular order. First, he goes to the temple. Then he talks to a Samaritan woman, a woman who is not a Jew, and speaks about worship in a very different way. So let's read John chapter 2, beginning in verse 13. It says, "And the Jews' Passover was at hand. And Jesus went up to Jerusalem and found in the temple those that sold oxen and sheep and doves, and the changers of money sitting, or the cashiers. When he had made a scourge of small cords, he drove them all out of the temple, and the sheep and the oxen, and poured out the changers' money, and overthrew the tables. And he said unto them that sold the doves, Take these things away, and make not my Father's house a house of merchandise. And his disciples remembered that it was written, The zeal of your house has eaten me up.